I just first wanted to say thank you so much, Jules, for inviting me to do this, because as I was speaking with Lou, it feels a little bit like a coming out, because I think there is something, like everyone here has mentioned, there's something about our society where, you know, if you're, that's okay. If you say to someone, oh, I've had a psychotic episode or a psychotic break or a really, really, really bad nervous breakdown, you kind of get this, you know, there's this kind of stepping back. And so it feels just really good to be able to speak about it in this space and with these people. And I've heard Tim speak before, and he was actually someone who then got me onto a journey of holotropic breathing. And I'm going to focus more on a crisis that I had, the sort of big, more a psychotic episode that I had, rather than my current spiritual explorations. So that's where my focus is going to be today. So it's slightly different from other talk, a little bit different. So I really like the term psycho-spiritual crisis, because psychosis to me feels like it focuses too much on the pain and the shame and the kind of disgust that comes with that word. And there's something about spiritual emergence that, for me, sort of what Anthony was saying, that focuses too much on the beauty and the divine, and actually doesn't acknowledge the real pain and the terror that often comes, well, I think probably always comes with this kind of shedding and rebirth. I think they're quite polarized positions, and actually a big part of my healing journey has been about reconciling these polarized positions and coming to a place of ambiguity, and the more ambiguity I can hold, the healthier and more connected to the world and to myself that I feel. As others have said, 15 minutes isn't very long, so I'm going to give you kind of a shorter version of my experience. When I was 18, I was working in a bar in Paris, and I didn't have any plans for my future. I was sort of just being free and working quite many shifts and taking drugs and not sleeping very much and wanting kind of quite intense experiences. And I started to feel more and more anxious, and anxiety I just had never experienced before, a very raw anxiety, and I just sort of kept overriding it with the same stuff. And suddenly I started burning things. I would burn necklaces that felt like they were infiltrating my being, or I would burn bits of furniture, or I started to really start to become quite paranoid, and I thought I had to leave Paris. Actually, I find it really interesting that most people had their experiences away from home. I thought that was quite interesting, is when you're in this kind of limbo place, not really connected to an environment that you're used to. So then I thought, I went to a travel agent and I said, I have $99, and they said, you can get to New York, because the September 11th had just happened. So I went to New York, and I had a friend there, and then I started to really become more and more manic and lost connection with reality more and more, and I found myself on a bus to Canada, and that's when I started to have really quite severe audio hallucinations. So I would hear people saying things about me that, you know, I sort of knew then, although they were so real as my voice is now, that I would then take actions, you know, whether it was leaving or confronting them and things. And I then went back to, and I wasn't sleeping at all at this point, I went back to New York, and then I had sort of my full, what I call kind of my full episode. I was in a hallway and I laid down. Oh, just before this, I was going to go commit myself to an institution. I'm glad I didn't. But I kind of had this clarity of like, okay, things are really fucked up. You've got to go sort it out. Instead, I laid down, and I sort of had, I think it was about 5 hours when I kind of look back, where I completely left my body. I didn't even know I had a body anymore. It was just completely out of it. I was sort of in the universe, but not in a very beautiful way, in a very frightening and terrifying way. And Jesus was there, but he was not a beautiful or kind person. He was very reprimanding. I was brought up quite strict Catholic, so it's kind of obviously why, looking back, that's why he was there. There was something comforting about him, but mostly scary. And my father's voice, and he had died when I was 15, so his voice was there and it was looming. And there was all sorts of things kind of going on, and it was definitely the most horrifying experience I've ever had, and also the most awesome. So it was sort of both, but mostly deeply terrifying. So afterwards, after this, I felt completely detached from material reality. Even before this, I was struggling to open doors. I was struggling to connect to the way you were describing the solidness of reality. And if I had had more support, I would have been able to be like, oh, I'm experiencing another type of reality, another part of reality. But I didn't have that. So I was just, again, terrified because everything was disintegrating. And this continued after my psychosis. So, and I had to, you were talking about putting up a front. I was the same. I just put up a front to the world. And like Lou said, my ABC alphabet had gone, the alphabet of language, well, not language I could speak, but just how things function. So I had to kind of make it up. And like my mom seemed completely alien to me. I didn't know how to relate to her. I didn't know how to just relate in the world and when to have showers and when to do things. But at the same time, I started to gain insight into a completely new dimension. And you know, it wasn't just this punishing Jesus. It was like a kind of divine quality to life and to beings that I hadn't experienced before. And suddenly, it wasn't an intellectual thing. It was like an experiencing of this. And that was beautiful. It was a real deep shifting of consciousness. But at the same time, I felt very broken. And I had no support. And I didn't want support because I was terrified of being locked away. I didn't know that people had these experiences. So I was just terrified of being locked away. So I had to keep pretending, which I think made it much worse. I don't want to go into the roots and causes too much because of time, but basically it was unresolved trauma, being one of the portals, as someone said, and not dealing with my father's death. He died when I was 15, and my family is quite traditional, so it was, you know, suppress it, don't deal with it. And I guess the main point I want to put across here is that the root cause that for me, and I found it really interesting that Jules and I think everyone said that it was meditation or breathing and connection to friends. And those are the two main things that as now working as a psychotherapist, I can see that it's really about connecting to the body, not bypassing the body, connecting to the body, and then also relating, not just to the hallucinations or the oneness that we experience in those states, but actually to, you know, physical people. So touching is important and really feeling that connection. And I think we all crave connection, like as much as we crave water and food and oxygen, we crave connection. And so I think as children, if we have a lack of connection, we compensate by having, and an imagination is a beautiful thing, but I think when it takes over and it starts kind of making up for reality, that's when it becomes toxic. And also I think from this place of lack of connection, we build false narratives about ourselves. And that can be part of the build up to something that needs to break open, break free. And my false narrative was that I was supremely confident, that I was charismatic, that I was very cool, that I didn't really need things that normal people needed. And some of that was true, but a lot of the time I was feeling really insecure and really frightened and really afraid, just really afraid and sensitive, very, very sensitive. And there wasn't room for that. And so, and it was screaming from my body. So I think my disintegrating mind and my body were kind of screaming until they tore their way into my consciousness and they ripped apart all previous understanding of myself. So that thing of the building collapsing, it really felt like everything was gone. I felt like I was hiding all the time and enveloped in a severe and never-ending panic. And this continued after the psychosis for about a year at least. How am I doing for time? Just keep going, just tell me. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about transcending the ego. And this was something I definitely experienced in my psychotic break or spiritual emergence or the combination of the two. And I think my ego, the way I see my ego is my narrative and my kind of construction of myself and the way of protecting myself. And actually, although I did transcend it, I think if I had been more robust and more flexible, I could have actually used it to help me to guide my way through this experience. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case. And so to my mind, transcending the ego can actually be a kind of escaping the pain, because It's a way of bypassing the pain. And actually, I had tried to transcend my ego previously through drugs and alcohol and kind of really out there experiences, and I'd been successful to a certain point, but now this wasn't just a transcendence but a complete rupturing. And I wrote, it's a kind of clarity that blinds with its rawness. The nakedness that it brings is a terrifying kind of pain. I have no skin and I can feel everything. The pulses of the universe and the pain of others and this constant aching terror. I was really lucky not to be treated institutionally. And many people have said, how did you get through it? I wrote a lot. Writing really helped me. Or with medication. And yeah, I wish I'd had some support then. I think Valium would have been really helpful. I was yearning for something, but I was just terrified of being locked away or told that I'm completely mad, because I felt like I was and I had to pretend not to be. Though sometimes I wanted that too. I thought, actually, if they just locked me up and gave me medication and told me what to do, fuck, that might actually be a real relief. But most of the time I was terrified. And most of the time what I longed for was peace, and also these manic states that I would get in that were where I would reach the state of oneness, and I would really experience everything as feeling very connected, and it was beautiful and awesome. So I started to chase those experiences. Those became the only experiences that I wanted. And there were bursts of really awesome energy, sort of like being on MDMA or a really good acid trip. Just things were just glorious, and I didn't have to feel the pain. So I chased them through drugs and things, and then I went and I did a transpersonal counseling course, which is about basically like looking things from a spiritual perspective. And that was really, really helpful too, sort of shamanic rituals and trances. But I realized that again, I was just bypassing the pain. And actually it wasn't until we had it wasn't until I kind of lay on the floor and a friend helped me to connect to my body. He said, connect to this chakra, this energy center. That was easy because I was here a lot of the time, connect to here. And as I started to go lower, and I was in my kind of root chakra, or the place with security and stability, I just started to spin and spin and spin. I opened my eyes, everything was spinning. And then I started to vomit violently. And I thought, okay, there's something here that I need to follow. And what also helped me was Gestalt psychotherapy, which is, I'm a Gestalt psychotherapist, it emphasizes truth, like it emphasizes lived experience as truth. And so you ground all your experiences, like your abstract experiences, in the kind of, sensory, your senses, our bodies, our relationships to the environment and the here and now. So that's been really hugely helpful for me, because it doesn't deny the existence of the spiritual, but at the same time it keeps us very much grounded in our bodies. So I was talking about the lack of connection and how this is a really big point that can cause this kind of devastating experience. I think because we become really weary of real life connections when we've had ones that we can't really trust. And so like I had been saying before, is that we rely too much on our imaginations or other ways of experiencing that connection. And the antidote to replace those not false connections, but those kind of less concrete connections, is by, again, forming new connections and forming those, connection from person to person. So, and in this way, our need for intense paranoid beliefs or grandiose belief becomes sidelined, because we don't need that anymore. We have the nourishment of real connection, and we learn to connect to others and ourselves in a more ambiguous and more authentic way. So we have a wider spectrum of contacting the world and ourselves, which leads to just a richer life and more satisfying connections. And my work as a Gestalt therapist has confirmed this time and again, both the people going through severe depression or panic attacks or overwhelming spiritual experiences that they can't quite handle, and because they're not part of our cultural background, sadly. So I guess the main point I want to make here is that, which I think others have made as well, is that it's about connecting to our physical world and our physical pain, which is stored in our bodies, as well as connecting to people and then allowing us to navigate these other planes, if they do kind of burst open unexpectedly. So because at these points of crisis, there's something calling out from the kind of the wilder and darker landscapes within us, and there's a real call for shedding, which is what happened, a kind of complete shedding, and a kind of new understanding of the world. As a psychotherapist and psychiatrist I love called Franceschetti, and he talks about from absence of connection, we then, as therapists and as people experience that, we sit with the absence, and then we move from that to pain, and then from the pain we move to beauty. And I really like that, that way of thinking about this. Okay, I'm almost finished. Yeah, so basically if I'd had a sense of belonging and trust in the world, then my psycho-spiritual experience, which was an intense shedding of an old way of being and a kind of initiation into understanding the divine, would have been much more grounded, integrated, and less overwhelming. And also not disconnected from my personal experience. So it would not have been transpersonal, which it was, but it would have been a deeply personal and lived experience, and a more contained experience of a universal divinity or life force, whether it's collective consciousness, archetypal realm, or things that Anthony was speaking about, or an understanding, and Lou as well, or an understanding and witnessing of the expression of the divine in oneself and in all of life. And I think, so the more we can tolerate and appreciate ambiguity, which is holding both the psychotic, which I think we all have all the time. We all are somehow quite close to the psychotic experience. And if we can tolerate that and the kind of the more spiritual place as well, and integrate that, the richer, deeper, and more varied our experience of life can become. That's it.